Nice little slide by. Good morning, trade pros, or good afternoon. He's trying to kick me out of screen here. You got the lazy leg going on back there. Good morning, everybody. Just waiting for this guy to show up on my end here so I can mute myself. There it is. Perfect. So now I can see the comments in YouTube. So if you guys are out there, make sure to drop by, say hello, use that interactive chat, just so I know I'm not speaking to myself. So today's update, we come off a pretty volatile Friday close. And this week is relatively light as far as the economic agenda is concerned. Not too much on the schedule for this week. Like I said, the only thing that we really have of high impact economic releases come out Thursday morning. We have core durable goods orders, the month-over-month figures come out at 8:30. And on Friday, we see the advanced GDP, the quarter-over-quarter figure. This one is an important, really important reading, the advanced GDP. So that's going to be a good one to watch on Friday ahead of the FOMC meeting. I believe it's next week. Ahead of the FOMC meeting next week on Wednesday. So that's all that we've got really on the agenda as far as economic releases out of the States this week. So a majority of what we'll see as far as news drivers are going to be headline risk. So at the moment, I am seeing on Bloomberg, China hints at trade talks restart after making goodwill moves. So just seeing some squawks coming out that really with regards to that U.S. trade war negotiators said likely to visit China next week for first face-to-face talks since G20. That was a squawk that came out of China. And that's what it's looking like. So trying to press some more optimism towards that U.S.-China trade war dispute. That's really what's going to be a headline driver, at least what I anticipate to be a headline driver leading into the end of the week until we start seeing some of that economic data, which the Fed has been data dependent on. So up and until then, we'll keep an ear out for any squawks that can affect the moves here. Any tweets coming out of Trump. I do see a tweet out of Trump this morning. He mentioned, with almost no inflation, our country is needlessly being forced to pay a much higher interest rate than other countries only because of a very misguided Federal Reserve. In addition, quantitative tightening is continuing, making it harder for our country to compete. So again, this was kind of what I have anticipated to be Trump's plan all along. Just kind of talking down on the Fed, and now the Fed is starting to look like they are leaning towards the rate cut or quantitative easing, rather dropping back into quantitative easing as opposed to the tightening. If you guys can recall, earlier this year, leading into January, traders were anticipating, I believe it was 2 or 3 more rate hikes through 2019. That number has obviously changed, and we are now expecting at least a rate cut in July, at least 25 basis points. Whether it's 25 basis points or 50 basis points, that is yet to be determined. But as it stands, the picture that's kind of being painted by the Fed at the moment is that there will be a cut leading into the July FOMC meeting. So that being said, nothing else on the agenda for the remainder of today's session. As mentioned, the majority of high impact news events come out on Thursday and Friday. So that being said, let's jump into the charts here quickly. A couple of other drivers that I have for you guys overnight were, semiconductors and the NASDAQ are kind of seeing a little bit of strength this morning on the back of semi stocks getting positive analyst coverage. So the information technology sector at around 11 a.m. was up 1% in the S&P 500, whereas the majority of other sectors were down for the session at the time of posting. Consumer staples, materials, and communication services were the largest decliners. And as mentioned, the information technology sector got a little bit of a boost. That we also saw on the back of NASDAQ, I believe Micron was upgraded overnight. Let me just confirm that. Yeah. So NASDAQ is the clear leader as far as strength is concerned on today's session. This was helped by an analyst upgrade of Micron. And the Dow was the weakest one this morning. And that was likely a result of the Fitch analyst company revising its outlook on the plane maker to negative. So Boeing, as you might know, is around 11% of the Dow, one of the largest constituents, if not the largest constituent of the Dow, and that results, I believe the weighing is around 11%. So on the back of that negative outlook on Boeing, you can imagine the Dow kind of slipped, and the remainder of the equities kind of followed suit. So although we do have a stronger NASDAQ on the session and a weaker Dow, we're kind of seeing mixed signals in the US equities. However, at the moment, it looks like we just had a little bit of a rotation back up to the open on the SPOs. And now we kind of got to watch to see if the sellers want to come in to defend that level, or if the buyers come in and press this thing back up above the overnight high and back up above the 2990s. So that is all that we have as far as economic agendas. As far as new squawks, that's what we're looking for into the remainder of today's session. So now you guys are caught up. Let me jump into the quote board here and get you guys updated on levels. So what you see in front of you, crude oil at the moment, okay volume, 480,000 contracts traded so far in today's session. On average, we've been seeing around 500 to 550,000, so a little bit less than average, but still creeping its way near the average. Daily change percentage, we are up 0.9%. Your previous day close came in just below that overnight low at the 55.86. Last traded price is 56.28, right up there, and that's what's giving us the daily change percentage. Even though it is a positive daily change percentage, you know, it's still pretty bearish off of the pit open. You can see the pit opened right around 56.49, and we flushed straight down into the overnight low basically. And we have not gotten back above that open as of yet. So as long as we remain below that open, you know, you can argue sell side is still in play. We are coming into that previous day high where we've seen one rotation, two rotations. Now we're seeing a couple more rotations. Do the sellers press it lower here, or do the buyers overcome and get this back above the open? We'll find that out in a couple. That's what we got on the quote board for crude. For S&P 500. Pretty light volume, 664,000. You know, towards the tail end of last week, we were seeing around mid 700s. So, you know, volume's kind of tapering off. And that's kind of what you're seeing in today's session. A little bit choppy, not that much direction. There was a good fade off of the overnight high below that VWAP, but now that's kind of played itself out. Now we're kind of back in no man's land, where you're kind of in the middle between where the buyers can come in and press this thing to overnight highs and the actual overnight highs themselves. So we'll cover that in a second. But as far as the quote board is concerned, pretty light volume on both of these markets. Not much change as it stands. You know, SPOs are also up 0.21% from their previous day close, which came in at the 72s. However, you know, overall, if you take into context what happened on Friday into the tail end of last week, we are still kind of bearish on this. So that's what we've got as far as quote board. Let's jump into our pivot charts, have a quick peek at what these guys are suggesting, and let's go from there. So first things first, crude oil, you can see we kind of found a bit of a bottom around the low 55s last week. A little bit of a higher low formed here. Did get a bit of a breakout of that range highs. Came up into the R1 on today's session, and we folded back down to the pivot. So really, you know, at this point, you can argue, you know, buyers might be coming back into the market. What they'll have to do to confirm that is to press this thing back above the R1 and hold that pivot as support. If that's the case, if we can get back up above today's pit open at 56.50 and press above that R1 into 56.80s, I think we'll have some clearance to get back up into that $58 handle on crude oil. If not, you know, if this was just a buy stop release, then we'll look for a rotation to fail around that R1, around those 56.80s, in order for the sellers to step in and press back to new lows. That's kind of what we're watching for on those pivot charts. On the equities, you know, S&P 500, this is the trend that we had last week. You know, a little bit of a press up into that R1. We came in there and failed off of that, broke to fresh lows, Now we've rotated during Globex into that pivot. We are starting to hold that pivot as resistance and pressing lower from there. So, as long as that pivot holds control, 29.87, that will be a big level. Back above that zone and the 29.90s, that was a big level last week. We'll likely see that press up again into 3,000 and into that previous resistance here around the 3,010s. So that's kind of the play. As long as we remain below that pivot on today's session, I think the sellers will still force further downside. At that point, I'm looking for the overnight low. That's kind of been my target since this open. The morning's open right in those 72 halves. So we'll be looking for any moves down into there on today's session. Taking a look at crude oil. Here's our 10-tick chart. What you guys can see is in Globex, nice little climb up to overnight highs of 57.04. Kind of gave up some of those into the pit open. Pit opened here at 56.49. We sold right off into that 5-day point of control. And you can see right around that zone, we found a bit of support, ultimately trading down into that overnight low before continuing back up into this previous day high and the Globex view app. So as I was mentioning, this level was support before. We had a nice breakdown, rotated back up, sold off from here once, sold off from here twice. Now we're coming back in and you are seeing some more rotations. This little wick up here on some nice volume. This is starting to show me sellers are coming back into the market. And now that we've broken above that previous day high, rotated under it, now we're rotating back up as resistance. This looks like a pretty good position where you can try a potential short back down for the overnight lows and the previous day close. I also see some bids sitting down there around the 55.90s. So still liking the shorts on this market. This is a nice level, as mentioned, where we did see structure before. So we are kind of in a bit of a channel at the moment. With that Globex and momentum pointed to the downside, I am anticipating another press back down into those lows. So it's kind of what I'll be watching for. What would disqualify that short idea for me? Well, you guys can see we haven't traded above the open yet. If we do get back above that open and press higher, that is going to disqualify that for me. So I'll stop looking for shorts if we get back above the open, and we'll kind of sit on the hands until then. As far as the S&P 500 is concerned, this is kind of what I'm chatting about. You can see structure is still to the bear side. We have had lower lows, lower highs. Overnight, we did gap up. Our previous day close, we gapped up into those 72.50s, and we started chugging up a little bit higher, coming into our previous resistance zone here in those 90s. And you can see during Globex, we had some resistance, some more resistance. And once we opened on the US cash open, we pressed back down into that view app. That view app held, gave us a nice run up into that overnight high. And, we were telling the room that after a bearish session the previous week, opening up on Globex, near highs, this thing looks kind of bearish. It looks like it wants to break out and then roll over. And that's kind of what it did. So as a team, we kind of caught that move back down to that view app. Some of the traders even got it back below this opening range low. But at this point in time, we did come into those 88s. You can see we did have somewhat of a double bottom support form in there. Now we are kind of pressing up. So at the moment, we are stuck in a channel between the overnight highs and the supports in the 80s, in the low 80s. And, not really too much to look for at this point of the day. I'm not really looking for much here outside of a move into the overnight high. We'll just want to see what buyers react like around this level here. You can see they did hold it a little bit. Once we broke through, we've kind of reclaimed that level. And now we are starting to form some support between that open and this opening range low. So if we continue holding that support and our NASDAQ presses higher, Dow presses higher, Russell's pressing higher, correlations agree, then at that point you can look to potentially pick something up around these 82s for a move back into that overnight high and potentially a pop into that value area high around these just under 3,000s. That would be the play. However, at this point, I'm still seeing structure is bearish. There was our last swing high, another swing high. So we've broken one swing high, which is not really a change in trend yet. We'll be looking for a break of this swing high at the opening range high in order to start gearing up for potential longs. Until that happens, One swing high is not too much to worry about. Once it breaks the second one here, then we can start looking to get geared along. So at the point as it stands, downside is the right side, below the open, below that overnight high. That's kind of how we'll be looking to play it. So with that being said, that is our coverage on the equities and the crude oil futures. And to close it off, we're going to take a look at our TRADEPRO performance index here, give you guys a indication of how the team did today. And what you will see on today's date, the 22nd of July, kind of gave back some of the gains from the last week. 56.82% of the room was green on today's session. 43% were up, just over 13.5 were flat, and 43% were down. So okay number. Still good to see that majority of the room finished green despite the chop in the crude, or rather in the S&P 500 markets. Crude oil did give you some opportunities, but you had to be really patient and get really good locations. So despite this being a little bit lower of a number than our current monthly average, nothing to worry about. TradePros bounce back, and TradePros bounce back very well, especially when the market starts to open up. So the goal here is not to make millions in choppy markets. It's to preserve capital in choppy markets so that you have capital to use when the markets are moving. And that's when the TradePros tend to do the best, once we start getting some volatility in the market. So good results overall. We look to continue this week on a strong note. This is the last week and a half of trading in July. This is the last week and a half of trading in July. So we'll look to close it out strong and get into August on a high note, as we're really, really looking forward to September. Labor Day weekend, September, once the volatility and volume starts to pick up in these equities and we get back to our 1.5 million contracts traded by noon. So until that happens, we'll keep you on the right side, or we'll try to keep you guys on the right side of the market. That's going to be it for me today. If you guys are enjoying this, you know what to do. You guys can help out our channel greatly, help out the algorithm by hitting that like button. The more likes we get, the more that we get presented to people like you that are looking for good quality information, and free information never hurts. So when you can combine quality information with value, and when it's free, that's a win-win-win. So with that being said, if you guys do enjoy the channel, make sure to refer some of your friends, make sure to refer some of your colleagues that might be looking to get into trading. I think we've got some great content on our channel that can help you guys out. Whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, there's something for everybody. And that's kind of the game plan. So until tomorrow, good luck and good trading. We'll see you then. Ciao.